You're listening to The Narrow Mind. Today is the 23rd of January, 2008, show number 906, my interview with David Campbell.
Coming to you live from our studios in Southern California, Real Christianity in the Real World, The Narrow Mind.
I hope you've learned something tonight, because you've got a lot of learning to do.
I've learned once again that the atheist can't account for morality. That's what I've learned.
Oh, are you kidding?
Do you sin as a Christian?
Please know that there are different degrees of sin. Worry is a
okay.
sin. I do worry.
You're a Roman Catholic.
I'm answering your question. I'm answering.
Okay, so obviously you didn't get all the Roman Catholicism out of your system when you claimed to have been born again.
And now our host, Gene Cook Jr.
Welcome back, folks, for another edition of The Narrow Mind. My name is Gene Cook, and I'll be your host for the next 60 minutes, approximately. Normally, I have sitting to my left my co-host Jonathan Goundry, but he's still sick. There's a nasty flu bug going around, and he's caught it. And so hopefully I won't catch it. So far, I'm holding up pretty good. My wife's got it, and I'm not sure who had it first. Maybe one of them could tell you, I'm sure. But anyway, hopefully if you can pray for him, he will be back in action soon. And I'm looking forward to having him back on the program and having him recover also from his sickness. So please pray for Jonathan. I know many of you out there listen to the show specifically because Jonathan's on it. Especially, you know who I'm referring to. Uncle Pete and David and Mom from Florida. So today is Atheistic Wednesday. You may recall, if you've been listening to The Narrow Mind, that we had scheduled originally the atheist that we had on last Wednesday, Rich Rodriguez. Rich sent me an email saying that he had a scheduling conflict with his work, so he would be unable to be on the show today. And so I wrote him back and asked him, does this mean that you are canceling, or would you like to come on? Can we reschedule? I'm not sure exactly what I wrote him, but I know that I asked him to reschedule. So I'm still awaiting the response from Rich, because I was really looking forward to getting into his epistemology, his theory of knowledge. And so hopefully he will reschedule. He is a member, of course, of the Rational Response Squad. You may recall one of the things that I asked him on the program was, did the other rational responders, Brian Sapient, know that you were going to be on the show? And he said no. And I know Brian personally has boycotted the program. He's been known to call me off the air and ask me questions, but when invited to come on the show or do an interview with Paul Manatta, or even a public moderated debate with Paul Manatta, he has declined. And so that's too bad, because we would really like to see Brian Sapient defend some of his beliefs. So hopefully at some point in the future we'll have Rich Rodriguez back. I'm looking forward to the second part of that conversation. The first part of the conversation, we just kind of got to know each other a little bit. I also want to remind our listeners that it doesn't cost anything to listen to the show. It's always free. You can listen there on the blog page at thenarrowmindaftermath.com. You can get to that page by clicking on the keyhole that says Narrow Mind Downloads on the home page at unchainedradio.com. Now, having said this, there are a lot of expenses that go into the program, and you can become a partner of the program by pledging either $25 or $15 a month. And many of you have stepped up and done that. We appreciate that. That is a tremendous help. You don't even know. And one of the things that we're doing during the month of January to show you our thankfulness for your participation in our financial venture here, in our theological venture known as the Narrow Mind, is to send you the complete Narrow Mind archive on DVD. This consists of 3 DVDs, over 400 MP3s, and if you sign up for the Pledge Partner Program during the month of January, we will send you the DVDs as our way of saying thank you. So if you want to know how to do that, you can just click on the link there at the top of the page, Narrow Mind Pledge Partner Program, and that'll take you over there. All right, let me introduce to you our guest today. His name is David Campbell. He's 21 years old. He lives in Bakersfield, California. And by trade, he is a computer technician. David, welcome to the Narrow Mind.
Thank you for having me, Gene.
All right. So you, as your employment, you help people fix their computers.
That is right. Basically, the story goes that I worked at a computer store, or a local computer store in Bakersfield called Computer Renaissance. They went out of business while I was employed there. And the last week, the owner came in and told us that we needed to, wrap things up and stop accepting service requests, which means people who have stuff to fix. But we still had, plenty of people coming in by the rows, I guess, with computer issues. And I asked the manager if I could personally just take care of their issues myself and inform them that the store is closing. They're not liable for these repairs.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be through me. And I ended up, being very successful at it. I mean, I got a lot of work, and people started asking for cards. The idea came around, and when they went down, I took the phone number and went into business for myself. So I'm kind of like a one-man geek squad.
Nice.
And I do have, friends who are in a similar situation. So on occasion, I'll subcontract. But in the end, I have a lot more freedom and a lot more money, and that's always good.
I just, speaking of computer issues, I just bought a new computer. And apparently there is some new monitor technology. Is it called ATI or something like that?
ATI is a company that manufactures video cards.
Okay.
I guess you can continue on. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I've got an ATI video card in my new computer, and I guess it takes a different type of monitor than the traditional VGA monitor.
That's right. On the video card probably has what's called a DVI port.
Right.
It's white, and basically it's digital instead of analog. There's a couple benefits to that, one of which your monitor can detect, your video card can detect the size of your monitor and adjust its resolution, and there's a lot of really cool features, but your video card should have came with an adapter, and if you don't have one, I can always just mail you one.
Yeah, that'd be great, because it said that there was supposed to be an adapter in the box, but it wasn't in there. And
so right now you don't have a screen?
No, actually, if you plug in a regular VGA monitor, and you hit F1 during the boot up, it'll go ahead and continue and continue to boot.
So your monitor has
dual ports. Yeah, it's got dual ports. So. But I'd like to have the latest technology. I mean, why not?
Yeah, I recently bought a video card. I spent over $300 on my video card. I know that's a lot. Most people spend that much on their whole computer, but I play some pretty hardcore video games, I guess you could say, that require a lot of resources, and it's a lot of fun. On occasion, play online and play with friends and stuff. So,
do you play WoW?
I do not. I play mainly first-person shooters, but currently I'm playing Call of Duty, and I've actually played in tournaments in Visalia, playing Quake. I've won some money doing that, and it's a lot of fun.
All right.
But
so you're an atheist. I didn't bring you on the show to talk about computers, but I appreciate the information, and I'll definitely, now that I've got your contact information, I'll definitely keep you in mind if something comes up. But if I could get that adapter from you, that'd be great.
I'll give you the pastor discount.
Cool.
But yeah, technically I would be considered an atheist. I don't really care to identify myself as such because it's such a label doesn't actually describe what you think, but rather what you do not think. Right? It's in the same way I would never come up to someone and say, "Hello, I'm a non-African." That doesn't identify who I am. That just identifies who I'm not. So I guess if the term atheist refers to someone who doesn't think that there are gods, then I guess that would be me. So technically, I don't think atheism is a worldview. A negative can't be a worldview, but I guess a more accurate term would be naturalism or a naturalist. That is more of a positive term, but in the end, ultimately, I am an atheist, and I've been one for about 4 years, I think. You may giggle at this, but what kind of sparked my interest was the infidel guy a long time ago.
Mm-hmm. Why did you think I would giggle at that?
Well, because I've listened to a couple of shows where you'll poke fun at him and stuff, and
he's an easy target. I'm sorry, he's just an easy target.
I'm not sure about that. I mean, he can be, I suppose. I remember there was a Budweiser parody you did.
Yes.
Where you made fun of his $1 million challenge or something like that.
Yeah, that's an example of what I'm talking about. He had the $1 million. For those that haven't been listening that long, he came out with this thing called the $1 million challenge, and then when it didn't take off as quickly as he hoped, he reduced it to the $10,000 challenge, and then shortly thereafter, within another 2 weeks, he reduced it to the monthly $2K challenge. So that's funny. I'm sorry. For me, that's funny. If Pat Robertson did that, you'd think it was funny too.
Yeah, no, I agree it's funny. But that was my basis for thinking that you giggle, I guess.
Yeah.
That one little thing, I don't know. But yeah, basically the original intent was I, at the time, had pretty strong convictions. I wasn't really, I guess, Christian. I was more of like a deist or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually wrote a little essay, I guess you could say, went on the forums. I said, hey, you atheists, you guys should check out, I pretended to be someone else. I go, check out my friend who wrote this thing. You guys should tear it down. I was kind of being provocative and confrontational. And they responded to it, and then I responded myself. And after a while, I discovered that my reasons, weren't as good as I thought. And it just that was the spark that ignited the flame of doubt. And eventually, now I'm just a big raging fire, I guess.
Mm. And what was your upbringing? Were you raised in a non-believing home, or?
Sure. Well, I don't really care to waste too much time on the whole, how did you become an atheist stuff. I think that's very boring. But in summary, my mom is moderately religious. She claims to be. I don't think that she's very strong in it. But I do have extended family who actually worked at the church, and in fact, there are a Christian lake camp somewhere in California. They actually some of my relatives actually live. And so, but at the family reunions, I'll hold hands and pray, and I'll do the whole thing. I don't mind. They all know that I don't share their beliefs about the divine, but I don't mind taking part in a family ritual, just because it's based on something a premise I may not agree with,
Well, that's considerate of you.
Yeah, well, in the same, I celebrate Christmas in the sense that I'll give gifts and enjoy the holiday, but all of us take part in rituals which are based on beliefs we don't find true. I imagine if I sneezed, you'd say, God bless you. But as you know, the origin of that has to do with the belief about the soul escaping or something of that nature. This, when you sneeze, the soul leaves, I guess. That was the origin of God bless you. And no one believes that, but we all say God bless you still. I don't, but that would be an idea, So.
Right.
So
you mentioned.
No, I guess that would be a quick summary, I guess.
Okay, you mentioned off the air that when I brought up the guest that we had last week when I was talking to you this morning before the program, and you mentioned that you don't really what's the proper terminology? You don't really share
really
fellowship with Rational Response Squad.
Yeah, I guess so. I didn't come out and mention that. I just said, yeah, Rich Rodriguez, I know him. He's from the Rational Response Squad, and I'm not liked very much by them.
So they don't think too highly of you.
Well, no, they accuse me of being religious and all this nonsense because I attack them on certain things. Like on occasion, I'll go in there and not on occasion, a long time ago before I was put on their permanent ban list, I would go in there and maybe defend kind of like a conservative perspective on economics, for example, and they said, oh, well, he's a conservative then, right? Or I would go in there and say that there are certain beliefs they have which may not be supported or may not be based on evidence per se, and they say, oh, well, that's just God talk. Like I would argue that they don't have any justification for certain beliefs about the reliability of their senses or whatnot, and they're basically bigots, fascists, and I really think that they hate philosophy. I go in there, I talk philosophy, and then they ban me. And if you were to, if I record it, you would see that all I'm doing is asking them questions about epistemology and goofy little philosophy things, and they just hate it. And any intellectual disagreement will be thrown out the window if the opponent is even moderately qualified.
Right.
Basically, if you sound like you maybe win a debate, then they won't debate you. Like they refuse to debate all kinds of people. The only people I actually heard them debate was Ray Comfort, which may be a nice guy, but
he's not a debater.
He's more of he's the kind of guy that would come to your little kids' church and maybe talk to them. But I just don't really care for them. I don't want to waste any time talking about it. Actually.
All right. So you define your worldview as naturalism. You think that's fair to say?
Well, naturalism is basically it's an ontological view, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a view about what exists. So, I mean, naturalism, obviously, basically my position is that all that you can truly say exists is nature, and by nature I mean something that is or can be reduced to impersonal parts or objects. Okay. So basically, if it is impersonal or it can be reduced to impersonal parts, then it would be considered natural. And so obviously God would be supernatural because he can't be reduced to anything because it's immaterial, and he is personal, right?
Mm-hmm.
So ghosts, spirits, gods, for example, those would all be disembodied agents, which would qualify as a supernatural being. But if they had a brain or whatnot, if they had some kind of machine that you could reduce them to.
A physical machine.
Not necessarily physical, just impersonal. Because, I mean, for example, the laws of physics aren't material, but I wouldn't say that they're personal. I don't think that the laws of physics like anything or want anything.
So you believe in non-physical universal laws?
Yeah, there are numbers, space, the law, laws of logic or laws of physics or whatnot.
Finally, an atheist that's thinking. So many atheists that I have on the program.
Well, I mean, there was a point where I really, I've read a few books that defend them at kind of a pseudo-materialistic kind of perspective, and I understand they do have ways of getting around the problems of numbers and all that stuff. But I think it really, when you get down in the dirt, all of us deep down, we all know that we all say numbers are real and that space is real, and in a very real sense, they do exist in a sense that matters, and so it's kind of dubious to say the only things that you could say exist are material or can be reduced to material.
Yeah, I would agree. So you're basic as a naturalist, you would say that you deny the supernatural, right?
Well,
I mean, is that an a priori assumption?
No. That isn't an a priori assumption. There are, I could give an argument or two for why I think that, but basically, I think the only things that you can say exist would be natural things. And so, obviously, things that are non-natural, supernatural, I really think that's the only alternative, actually, but wouldn't exist. I don't see any reasons to believe. I think there's some pretty good arguments to suggest that there wouldn't be any supernatural things at all. So, pretty much, I mean, I think naturalism is a more accurate...
Can you give me an example of one? What would be an argument that would preclude the supernatural?
Well, there's the inductive argument for naturalism, basically, that, you're familiar with the process of induction, and it's a form of reasoning that, we all agree could be considered a rational way of reasoning. And if you simply just look at history, all examples of phenomena that have been explained naturally, by natural explanations, explanations that don't include disembodied agents, right?
So how would a naturalist describe or account for the resurrection?
Let me continue, if I may. So basically, if you look at history, you discover that all examples of explanations that stand up have been natural ones. And it seems that the ones before there was natural explanations for things, there were supernatural explanations. And it's always been the case that the natural explanations have been better or won between the supernatural explanations. So think of it like this. Imagine that you and I are at a horse race, and you and I are betting on horses. And we go to the horse race, we look at the horse's records, and we say, wow, look at, horse 7. He's won every single race he's ever won. And look at horse 8. He's lost every race he's ever won. Who are you going to bet on, right? You're going to bet on 7. In the same way, if you look at history, natural explanations have been extremely superior, and it has never been the case that there has been an explanation for something that has been natural, that we found a supernatural explanation that there was more evidence for, or or had more explanatory power. So really, I'm just betting on naturalism because naturalism is the horse that always wins. And so you could say that it seems that
naturalism is the horse that always wins, given your analogy?
Well, historically,
you should be at the racetrack then, my friend.
Well, can you provide an example?
Instead of given your analogy, if you're just going to base it on naturalism, and the conclusion is inductively that if the horse has won every race, that means that it's always going to win, then you should be at the racetrack.
Well, I'm saying that seems to be the only conclusion. You know what I mean?
That's the probable conclusion. That's the probable conclusion, but that's not the only conclusion. There's a difference.
Okay. By a reasonable conclusion, I would say.
Or a reasonable conclusion, sure.
Oh,
but,
no, I contemplate. I think about supernatural relations all the time, but when it's kind of like, if you and I come up to a bizarre thing that you and I both can't explain, if I were to say, maybe it's some kind of natural phenomenon, I would be more reasonable to suggest that because I have, pounds of history on my side where naturalism has simply explained it better.
Okay,
right?
So let's start out with a very fundamental example to challenge your theory.
Sure.
Life coming from non-life. Please give us.
That's actually the best counterexample I've had. Because
might as well cut to the heart of the issue.
Well, no, certainly. Well, because you could also say, well, every example of life that we have has came from life. Therefore, it's, such and such. No, yeah, I agree. That's a completely reasonable argument. And if I were to use inductive reasoning there, I would have to conclude that all life came from life, right?
Okay. So
the only issue with that, though, is it seems like, as you know, induction it's a method of reasoning that isn't absolute or whatever you want to say. It's just a pretty good way of reasoning, and on occasion it's wrong. But it seems like that can't be true because there had to have been a time when there wasn't life. So obviously, it's kind of like saying every.
No, there didn't have to be a time when there wasn't life. See, that's your a priori assumption.
Well, I'm not sure if it's a priori because I would just point to the Big Bang or something. It seems like maybe during the explosion there wasn't any cats, right? I mean,
mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't think that life could exist with a zillion degree explosion going on. So, I don't know. I mean, I do. Abiogenesis is a huge question mark in my mind. I don't know what happened, but but I think that's okay.
So, when it comes to the most fundamental question about the existence of you and I, you don't have a naturalistic explanation, but yet you say that there's pounds of evidence for naturalism.
Well, just because there's one thing that I'm unable to explain doesn't change that there may be tons of other things that can be explained by naturalism.
Okay, but the one thing that you can't explain is the most fundamental issue to all of life. In other words, maybe
the reason that it's so hard is because it is so fundamental. In fact, what do you mean by fundamental? I don't see how that's a. I mean, you could probably could have said that about the origin of species, or you could have probably said that about the origin of galaxies. Man, how do these galaxies? How do they? Why are they all going in this really patterned shape?
Yeah. You're right. I could. And guess what? The Christian has the same answer for both questions.
I'm sorry?
The Christian has the same answer for both questions. God has revealed himself in Scripture as the creator. He's the one that brought life into existence, and he's the one that set the universe in its pattern. Okay.
Well, that may be true, but that's superfluous because let's just take an example, a really easy one. Let's say you and I are trying to explain. Let's say you and I come upon a frozen puddle, right? And we take the ice out of the puddle, and we discover the ice is exactly shaped like the puddle, like the puddle itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I say, wow, look at that. This ice is exactly formed, almost as if it was designed to be put in this puddle. The shape is exactly corresponds to the puddle. You say, well, yeah, but maybe when it froze, the water just kind of went in there. You know what I'm talking about. The water goes in there, it flows in the cracks, and when it freezes, it stays like that. So maybe that's how it happened, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have two explanations. One completely explains it with really, with stuff we know about, like water and physics and freezing, whereas I could invoke, let's just say I invoke a ghost that did it. It is true that the ghost believer can account for those things as well, but his account doesn't add any explanatory power to it. You see what I'm saying? So I agree. In fact, I actually think that Christianity can explain everything, because it's such a, well, not Christianity per se, but God belief or gods in general. You can explain anything like that, right? You can just simply say a designer made it like that. Well, that explains everything.
Well, there's two differences. There's two differences. The first difference would be, in the case of your analogy, let's say that there was a person that claimed to have seen the puddle form, and he told us exactly how it formed because he was an eyewitness. Okay. All right? And his name is God. He's a person. And so he revealed to us how it happened. He basically was there. Okay? The second thing is that this God is not just some figment of my imagination, but he happens to be a precondition for intelligibility. So, in other words, I can't even employ, well, let me rephrase that. I can employ induction and I can employ deduction and I can be rational. But apart from this God, I have no explanation or basis for rationalism. So it's more than just, I've got two extra components there. One, there's a person that was there that told me how it happened. Secondly, this person happens to be a precondition for all intelligibility. Yeah, then that would be a pretty good that would be a pretty good, you'd have a lot on your side then. Well, that's the Christian worldview. That's a presuppositional. That's the Christian worldview. It is presuppositional, but that's how it's revealed in Scripture. You have to agree that there are Christians who aren't presuppositionalists, right? That's true. Or are you one of those who think that anyone who disagrees with Gene Cook about anything is not a Christian? No, absolutely. There are Christians who are not presuppositionalists, but the question is the Bible presuppositional? That's okay. That's completely different. I agree. Yeah, and the Bible is presuppositional. It goes all the way back to Adam and Eve. Sure. Eve wanted to assume autonomy and decide for herself what was good, and God basically told her that she could not eat through the mediation of her husband. Sure. And when she decided to think autonomously, her and her husband plunged the whole human race into sin. If she had continued to submit to the lordship of God and followed his instructions and realized I'll grant you that the Bible's presuppositional. I don't really, I don't want to spend time. I'll just grant that. That's fine. That's fair enough. I've heard some of those arguments anyway. But yeah, I mean, I guess you said I'm a thinking atheist. I mean, I guess suppose it's a compliment. Yeah, it is. But yeah, I mean, there are a couple things that I guess you would be surprised about, that about my beliefs, I guess you could say, about the nature of immaterial things and the laws of logic and induction, and all those kind of things that you guys just love just to swim in. You presuppositionalists are unique in that you guys have a small magic bag of arguments that appear to be used almost exactly the same way every time, which is okay, because if they're true, there's no reason to change. If they're true and they work, exactly. There's an old saying: if it's not broken, don't fix it. Yeah, I mean, people always say there are certain phrases that are said all the time, but that's just because they're true, right? Yeah, so that's not a knock on you. It's just a unique feature, I guess. All right, I'll tell you what we're going to do, David. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in about 3 to 4 minutes. When we get back, I'd like to actually talk to you about how you account, as a thinking atheist, how you account for non-material things such as laws and universal concepts such as logic. You're listening to The Narrow Mind. We'll be right back. My guest today, David Campbell, an atheist. We're talking to him about life in general. All right, welcome back, folks, to the second half of the show this morning. It's about 35 minutes after the hour of 9 a.m. I'm running on an empty tank, I tell you. I worked about 11 and a half hours last night, or yesterday. Got off at about 11:30, 11:45 last night. Didn't get much sleep, but I'm feeling pretty good in light of that. And I appreciate the fact that I have a job, which is new to me for some of you. Those of you that listen regularly know that I recently, within the last month or so, started a new job. In fact, I'm also in the computer business in a different way. I'm in the search engine optimization business. David, I don't know if you're familiar with, I'm sure you are, SEO companies. But one of the largest ones in the world is based here in Temecula, and they hired me. So it's kind of good, especially being that I have a website. I'm learning quite a bit of information and technology that I can actually employ with the UnchainedRadio.com website. I also want to urge our listeners to subscribe to the email list that goes out, and this is a weekly announcement that lets you know what's going to be on tap on the Narrow Mind, who our guests are going to be, what the subjects are going to be, the times of the programming, etc. So you can sign up for that by just clicking on the green mailbox there in the right-hand column at the UnchainedRadio.com website. Now, you've got a MySpace account, David. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that? Kind of a MySpace blog, actually.
Well, I'm not sure if there's much to say. It's just a little profile, I suppose. But I have a couple of blogs. I have opinions about free will, purpose, meaning, naturalism. A few political blogs may pop up, but it's nothing that I do really on a consistent basis. It's just usually I'll get into a discussion with somebody, and I have a little trouble maybe explaining myself. And I get so frustrated that I know that I could explain it better, so I usually just go on the computer and just write it down. I started to write a book, and after about 15 to 20 pages, I discovered that I may need to maybe think a little bit more about the subject that I was thinking about writing about, and that was a small little project that didn't go anywhere. But yeah, it's just a little hobby. It's nothing really to gloat about, I guess. But
yeah, if somebody wanted to read some of your articles that you've written on the blog, why don't you give them the website?
Oh, it's just myspace.com/QXDC, Q as in Quake, X as in X, D as in David, and C as in Campbell.
Okay.
And, there's a couple interesting ones. There's a one on atheism and meaning, and probably a lot of subjects that you guys would just love to attempt to take apart and all of that. But I just want to question: this is only an hour show?
That's right.
Well, is that by design or by limitations on your part, or what?
Well, both.
Really?
Both. Yeah, if I don't somehow limit it, then it could go on forever.
Well,
because I like to talk a lot, and so, I kind of got to draw the line somewhere.
What I was going to say is, if you had a longer show, you might be able to charge a little bit more for the show. And I personally enjoy longer shows anyway, and I don't like limitations. Like an hour, it's kind of short.
Yeah. Well, we do the show 5 days a week normally, so there's not too many podcasters out there that are actually producing 5 hours of audio per week.
Yeah, but just two hour show would be okay, I think.
And we do that from time to time. Let me ask you, so before we went to the break, we were talking about naturalism, about universal abstract laws such as logic, laws of non-contradiction, concept of numbers, and so on. On our website, you and I mentioned this before we came on the program this morning, there is a link on the left-hand side. In fact, if you are, I'm talking to the listeners now, if you're sitting in front of your computer, if you click on the left-hand, or you look in the left-hand column, and you click on a little module there that says, it's actually a graphic that says, Sinner Ministries Proof That God Exists .org. We're going to go through that, and I'm going to show you how this works. And in fact, I think this is a really good tool for us as Christians to forward to our forward a link. You can forward a link to an unbeliever, an atheist, whatever, and have them go through it. So when we open up the first page, and by the way, I want to give credit to the brother that wrote this. This is a brother from Canada by the name of Cy, and this is his website, proofthatgodexists.org. I've had him on the program a couple times, and it's been quite a while since we've even really looked at this on the show. So I'm glad you brought it up, Dave, because I think we're overdue for taking a look at this. But I'm also curious, based on the first 30 minutes of our discussion here, how you'd answer these questions. So what it is, for those that might be listening via the podcast and not sitting in front of their computer, what it is, it's a website that basically takes you through a series of windows that allows you to answer certain questions. So if you answer a question, it takes you on to the next screen. So you kind of choose your path, if you will. And the first screen that opens up is entitled, What Do You Believe? And there's 4 boxes to choose from. There's 4 answers to choose from. First answer is absolute truth exists. Second answer is absolute truth does not exist. The third, I don't know if absolute truth exists. And 4, I don't care if absolute truth exists. Now, obviously, you've taken a look at this, David, so I'm assuming that you've already formulated an answer for this particular question.
Yeah.
So what is your answer?
Well, let's go through them all real fast.
Okay.
Absolute truth exists.
Mm-hmm.
Go to step 1. Laws of logic exist. Mathematics exist. Laws of science. Absolute moral laws. I'm not sure about that, so I'll click
the
other one.
Well,
what's that?
Did you click on absolute truth exists?
Yeah.
Okay, so is your position that absolute truth exists?
I think you could say that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's a pretty important question.
I'm sorry?
That's a pretty important question. I'm sure as a philosopher you've pondered the question, does absolute truth exist?
A little bit. Yeah, I mean, I think there are statements which are true, and they're absolutely true.
Okay, so therefore, absolute truth exists.
That's right. That sounds right to me.
Okay, so let's click on that one. And
I click yes to almost all of them, by the way. The only one that I pause about the absolute moral laws, you know what I mean? But I'll just say, let's just grant that. And I mean, what's interesting is at the very end of this. So I don't understand why is it the case that if you agree that all these things are real, that you believe in a divine person who made the world? Where's the? You have premises that I don't appear to follow. The conclusion doesn't appear to follow from it. You know what I mean? Because it doesn't follow that just because God happens to be eternal, absolute, and all that other stuff, that if you believe in other things that have similar properties, that suggests that you know what I mean. I also believe there are cats which are fuzzy, right? But does that mean I believe in certain other animals that happen to be fuzzy too? This doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, the bridge that connects the two is this. We believe, as you already know, that Christianity and the existence of the triune God is a precondition for intelligibility and morality. Okay? So
let's talk about that. Let's just talk about that, because you asked me how do I account for logic and all this.
Yeah, how do you account for logic as a naturalist?
That's kind of where the rubber meets the road, kind of thing. And
because you've been using logic throughout our whole discussion.
Yeah, that's right. First, I want to clarify, by explain, you do mean, I'm sorry, not explain. By account, you do mean explain, right? By account, you mean
yes.
give kind of an explanation for. Well, I just want to kind of, I guess, answer the question with a question, and if you may, let me do that. You agree that the laws of logic are real, right?
Yes.
And they're eternal, right?
Yes.
And by eternal, we mean they're unchanging and they last forever.
Yes.
And you also agree that the laws of logic are eternal, immaterial, all that stuff.
Yes.
So my answer to the account question is you don't account for the laws of logic, because accounting, if it means to explain, and the word explain means to understand or make intelligible,
mm-hmm.
if the laws of logic are the precondition for intelligibility, you can't account for the laws of logic, because the laws of logic are used to account for things. The laws of logic, the laws of identity, would be used to account for the laws of logic and the laws of identity. So it would be circular. So the laws of logic are the laws of logic, such as the law of identity, are just simply just true, and they're just there. You know?
Well, hey, the God of Christianity, He's just true and He's there.
Well, but
you wouldn't accept that, would you?
Well, no.
As an atheist, obviously didn't accept it. That's why you're not a...
This is different, because you couldn't argue with me about the truth or the existence of the laws of logic without using them. So
I can't... What I'm trying to say is that, likewise, you can't argue about the laws of logic without using the triune Christian God, because you can't have a material universe and a naturalistic worldview and account for eternal, non-physical, abstract, universal laws such as logic. It only makes sense. It only comports to the Christian explanation of reality. So let me tell you.
Well, let's slow down there for a second. So why? Why can't I just?
Okay, great. Because if the laws of logic are eternal, all right, then that means, and they are ordered in a certain way. There is a design to the law of non-contradiction, for example.
Yeah.
All right. These are laws that are universally binding, right? Okay. In order for us to have a law, we have to have a lawgiver.
Well, no, that's a statement which I believe needs to be supported.
Well, if you want to just say that the laws of logic are your axiom, that's your first stop as far as reality, you can do that. But you've got.
Let me ask you this. Whenever we say the word law,
yeah.
what we kind of mean is basically it's a uniform behavior of something. Like, we use the word law to describe the way, I don't know how to explain it, but like law in the sense that if something behaves in a similar way all the time, we would say, like the law of such and such.
Gravity.
Right?
The law of gravity. If a rock falls to the ground at a certain speed.
So, the word law is used when something is unchanging or is always, happens the same way or whatever, right? So, would you agree with that?
Well, yes, but there's more. What you've explained is the descriptive aspect of the laws. In other words, you can only describe. We're going a little bit further here. We're not only just describing natural behavior or the behavior of reality. We're saying we're giving a prescriptive analogy. We're saying that there is a way that you should think. See?
No. That's not what I mean. I'm talking about.
No, that's what I mean. I'm saying that.
But the law of physics doesn't suggest anything about how you should do anything.
That's right. But
so the law of logic doesn't either. It just states.
No, it says that you should reason in a certain way.
No, it doesn't. That doesn't make any sense.
You shouldn't contradict yourself.
No, it does not. It simply states that something. It's saying something can't be the case. Not something.
Right, but if I contradict myself, you say to me, Gene, you shouldn't contradict yourself.
But that's different. That's
the laws of logic are prescriptive, not only descriptive.
Well, I have to respectfully disagree. I don't think that makes sense at all.
So you don't think that human beings should reason logically?
I happen to agree with that. But
okay, well, that's prescriptive.
Listen.
Prescriptive is what people should do. Go ahead.
Gene, it is true that I happen to think that, but that's my premise isn't that the law of identity states that something cannot be A and not A. In the same way that you would say that, I don't know, some kind of mathematical thing that you should always, you should divide by, or I don't know, 2 plus 2 is 4, and, for every, I don't know, you know how there's like certain mathematical laws that for every such and such there are such and such, like you can make a statement that's true all over the place. That's all true in mathematics. You wouldn't say that since, addition means that every number added to another number equals a greater number, that therefore one should go about adding numbers or anything like that. That doesn't follow.
Yes, I would. And so would your teacher in school. In other words, they would say, David, when you add 2 plus 2, you should come up with 4.
Okay,
so that is prescriptive. It's not just descriptive.
No, but that's, okay. I apologize. I thought you meant in a moral sense.
Well, morally, likewise, the same thing spills over to morality. You should act a certain way. See, atheism can only tell us how things have acted. They have no basis for telling us how we should act.
Atheism doesn't tell you anything. It's just a position. It's just the negative position of theism. There is no atheism saying anything, or there's no position about that.
Look, there is a worldview that contains atheism that has.
No, there's not. No. There's an atheistic. There's such thing as a worldview which happens to be atheistic, but in the same sense.
Okay, fine.
But it
call it naturalism, call it materialism, whatever. What I'm saying is your worldview cannot prescriptively prescribe any type of moral behavior and be consistent.
Okay, well that's That's fine. I'm talking about logic. I'm not talking about ethics.
Or logic. You can't tell me that I should reason logically. All you can tell me is, Gene...
That's not a statement. That's a moral statement. Let's just...
That's not a moral statement.
You don't think the word "should" is a moral, adjective? Or I guess it would be an adjective. Well, look. Let's rewind the tape a little bit, and let's go back to the concept of accounting for something, right? Mm-hmm. And I got into a question about the word law, that we use the word law to... I'm not talking about that laws are descriptions, but rather that the definition of a law, you could say, is a word that refers to a true pattern or whatever, right? Basically what I'm getting at is, you would agree that God is good, right?
Yes.
And that his goodness is kind of, in a way, unchanging. He doesn't become bad or anything like that.
Yes.
So in a way, you could say, God has he adheres to, you could say like the law of goodness, right? Like God in a way adheres to a consistent nature, right? So you're simply saying, well, God is a certain way, and the fact that he is a certain way is a presupposition, and it follows that such and such and such. Well, I'm just saying about that, you don't need to have God for that stuff. You can just say the laws of logic are there, right? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, you can say that.
Yeah, but
if
it's the
that's...
same thing. The only difference is that you add... The only difference between your quote-unquote explanation is that you have a God who loves us and who's, does all this other stuff. That you don't... How does presupposing...
Well, it also answers the other question that we posed in the first half of the hour.
Sure.
How does life come from non-life? So now we've got two questions answered. Where do universal, immaterial, abstract laws like logic come from? They come from God. How does life come from...
No.
How does life come from... How does life come from non-life?
Well, let me ask you this.
God creates...
Listen. You don't think that God created the laws of logic, right?
No, I don't.
Okay, but can God exist and not exist at the same time? No, right? So there's a sense in which himself is quote unquote restricted in a way to the laws of logic. So it seems like the laws of logic are something that even he like the laws of logic are the framework that even he exists in.
No.
Right? No?
The laws of logic exist in the mind of God.
Well, that
so they're not outside
laws
of God.
Logic, how can laws of logic exist in anything? They're just out there.
Well, I'm using human language to try to describe something that's indescribable.
Well,
so if you want to know where they originate in the mind of God, and God is eternal. Therefore, the laws themselves are eternal. God tells us in His Word.
Doesn't the word originate kind of suggest that there was a time that they come from something?
They come from God.
Well,
yes, you're right. They come from God.
Okay, well,
and so if the laws are eternal,
in your explanation of laws of logic, you're using them. So don't you see that? Of course. But
yeah,
there you go.
I do see.
So
it.
if you're using the thing that you're explaining to explain it, then you're really not explaining anything.
Well, not exactly. There is a form of reasoning that is completely valid. In fact, all reasoning at its very basis becomes circular. You have to presuppose certain things. There are a priori
I agree
truths.
With that, but that's different.
No, it's not. How is that different?
Water is wet because water particles are wet. You would agree that is not sufficient to explain water, right?
No, you're just describing aspects of it. I'm telling you that God is the first being. Everything comes from Him. Logic originates in the mind of God. Therefore, my understanding of God is completely consistent with the idea that these laws of logic are eternal and immaterial, because God is eternal and immaterial.
Okay, but
now you want to say, oh, the laws of logic just exist. They're there, so let's move on. And I'm saying, no, you wouldn't accept that if I said, well, God just exists. He's there. Let's move on.
Well, it's different because, okay, when you talk about the laws of logic, You use them, obviously, anytime you make a statement really about anything, you're presupposing.
Right. That's
you're presupposing something.
That's right.
But don't you see that whenever I say, whenever you and I make statements, we can say things. Well, doesn't that presuppose the law of logic? We don't say, doesn't that presuppose a thinking divine being?
Yeah, no, that's my position, exactly.
But you don't need to presuppose that. Imagine that's not the case.
Unless you just want to say, well, the laws of logic they're there. They exist.
Well, listen, you don't need... Okay, let me ask you this. Imagine if I told you the laws of logic, not only do they exist and they're eternal and all this other stuff, but they're also purple. Or rather, they're also purple. You would agree that it's true that I have to appeal to the laws of logic to make statements and account for things, but the purpleness isn't necessary in the equation. In the same way that you and I are, in a way, agreeing about what needs to be presupposed, the only difference is you just appeal to a being that thinks and that has desires.
But I also...
But listen, the desires and the thinking, that's not necessary. You don't... How is that any different from the purple? It's just not...
Because in order for our brains, listen, in order for our brains, for my brain and for your brain to be able to communicate, they have to be wired a certain way. It's like a network of computers. In order for two computers to speak to each other, they have to be wired up to understand the language that's going back and forth.
Okay.
God created us in such a way that He wired our brains in a very similar manner so that we could communicate. You and I could communicate, and He could communicate to us. In a world that is without a creator, without a designer, you have nothing but biological bags of motion that are in biological bags of matter that are in motion.
That's false. That doesn't make any sense.
Of course it's false, because the Christian worldview is true.
Well, no, what you said, your argument isn't true, not the conclusion. I'm saying that it doesn't follow that if there's not a God, that human beings are biological machines. Because there could be a God and there couldn't be humans at all. Right?
Yes, that's true.
So you can't say if no God, then... Because that...
If no God, no humans.
Well,
if no God, no intelligibility.
God. Well, that's all you can say. If no God, no God. You can't make conclusions about the nature of human beings and their biology based on the godlessness. Because you could say that there's no God, but there happens to be a fairy who made human beings out of magic, right? And you could be an atheist and believe in all that, and that doesn't equal biological bags of DNA or whatever.
Well, if that's fine, in other words, if you want to appeal to a fairy,
that is.
If that's what you're going to be forced to do, though, if you reject the God of Christianity, you're going to have to appeal to something like a fairy.
Okay, well, so it seems like what you're saying is that since it's the case that there are humans who have a mind which thinks intelligibly, you must presuppose a God who made it so?
Yes.
Okay, well, is it not true that God has a mind that thinks intelligibly?
Yes, but He's not a human being. So we're talking about a different class of persons.
Okay, but fine. Then, according to me, human beings are a certain class of persons which are in the same category as what you would say God is, and therefore they're not necessary to invoke other beings to create them. So,
are then also the human beings responsible for bringing life out of non-life? Because that's another precondition that God also.
But don't you see the intellectual bankruptcy in what you're saying? You're saying that since it's the case that there are human beings which think, we must assume that there's another being who made them think. But you could say the same thing about the being that made him. You could say, well, he thinks too. You say, well, my goodness.
No, I would say, well, he would have to be eternal. And since you already grant that there are things eternal, it's not that much of a stretch that there would be a person who's eternal.
Yeah, well, I'll just say, I think that there just is a world which exists, which...
See, you don't think that human beings are eternal.
No, of course.
But you are acknowledging that the laws of logic are eternal. That's the difference. And so what I'm saying is that you can't say that we are in the same class of God as some philosophy of explaining these things, because God is in a separate class than His creation.
Okay, but what you have to say then is that orderly things which are not eternal need to be explained by a eternal thinker. That's what you need to say. So you see what I'm saying?
What I'm saying is we think our thoughts after God's. And every time you use reason or logic, you actually borrow from the God who made you. Just like you said, it's the same analogy. You said earlier, Gene, you can't talk about logic without employing logic. Yeah, I'm just backing it up one step further. I'm saying that logic came from the mind of God. We are thinking people.
Listen.
No other creatures besides human beings even use logic. In other words, a chimp can't be guilty of a contradiction. Okay, so right away, there's another aspect where my worldview comports to reality. We are made in the image of God.
Well, you said that you just take it a step further back, right?
That's right.
It's like, but don't you see that even the first step assumes the laws of logic to be existing? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I don't have a problem with that.
Well, but then you can't say
that's why I call it
God is a
presupposition.
step back from the laws of logic if the laws of logic are the first step.
No, God is the first step.
But God couldn't exist with the laws of logic to be true.
That's right. No. No. You said what? God couldn't exist without the laws of logic being true?
Well, maybe he could exist, but what I'm saying is that if the laws were false, then, his existence wouldn't be, well, I think I may have misspoke. I'm not sure what I meant.
All right, I'll tell you what, David, we're out of time. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I'd like to have you back. We can explore this even further.
Well,
if you'd like to.
I would like to do a second hour.
You know what? I'm sorry, but I just can't. I've got a very busy schedule. I've got things I need to take care of during. I'm also pastoring a church, and I'm working over 40 hours a week doing the broadcast and trying to keep my family. Yeah, so I've got a lot of stuff going on.
Okay, well, when's the next show? I'd be more than happy to come on.
Well, why don't you come on next Wednesday? We'll do it again next Wednesday.
Okay, sounds good, dude. I enjoyed talking with you. You have my email if you have any computer questions.
All right, sounds good, man. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, folks, this brings us to the end of the show, and I did enjoy the conversation with David. I don't know, is it just me, or is the atheistic worldview unable to account for things such as logic and morality, things that they take for granted every day? That's my position. And I just don't see any way around it. I've never had an atheist come on the show that can actually explain in some coherent manner, although he was very articulate and did a great job of explaining his worldview. But we're going to continue this discussion next week because there's a whole lot more. In fact, we could continue talking about this for probably 10 hours. So we will have David back next week on Atheistic Wednesday at 9 a.m. Be sure and tune in for that. And we'll see you tomorrow, Lord willing, for Covenant Theology Thursday. You've been listening to The Narrow Mind.
The Narrow Mind. Real Christianity in the real world. You won't hear this kind of Christianity on your AM/FM radio.
In your life, you seem to have it all. You seem to have control, but deep within your soul, you're losing it. You never took the time, assume that you're to blame.